I hate being right. Actually, I was saying that we were on the bear flag for Bitcoin, and even my last video, I mentioned that at a price target between like 60 and 70,000 at a minimum for Bitcoin on this cycle. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we got this consolidation area. Now we're getting close to the top of that. We're probably going to chop in that range, and if you look at that range, it's pretty wide, man. It goes all the way down to 53K to the top where it's at now, about 72, 73,000. And it looks like we're real close to that. We're at 77,000 currently, which I had a small support listed there, an alert set up for that. I'm not yet buying the dip here. I have bought the dip last week. Actually, I was starting to buy shares of Blocks, which holds both Ethereum and Bitcoin, including crypto companies within it. So I've been buying that. I figured I might as well get paid a dividend while I'm loading up on it. I'm not too heavily allocated yet, but I had a previous position in BTCI, and I chose about 2 weeks ago to sell a covered call on it because looking at the chart on Bitcoin, it looked bearish. It was on a bear flag and it was consolidating for weeks, and it finally broke below that consolidation. If I was going to run a trend line, you can see what I'm talking about. We're consolidating in this channel for a while on a bear flag, and now it's broken beneath that consolidation. So looking at it now, what is it forming? It looks like a classic Head and Shoulders almost. So if you running a neckline on that, you would run it from the armpit basically of the neckline. Run a trend line from there to about there, I'd guess. It's kind of sloppy looking, I think, but anyway, thereabouts. And then you run a plumb line, vertical line coming down from the previous top. Let me move this out of the way. So you go from wherever the top was and you run down the distance of that. So where is that basically? 124 down to the neckline, maybe 184. So a move of about 40,000 potentially from that neckline down, which I don't think we get that, but that would put us way down in the 30,000 something range on Bitcoin on a Head and Shoulders if it was going to play out. Now, a lot of times they're invalidated, so I don't really give a lot of credence to that. I think if it was going to get down to 34,000 or the 30,000 range, you would have to load up. That's just what I would do, and you can see that there was a previous support area that I had listed out, 31K. And if that did happen, I would go ahead and float the boat at that point. I'm going to start loading again on shares of Blocks in between 60 to 70,000 range if we get there. And in addition, I'm going to be examining BTCI at that point and getting ready to sell out of the money puts on it, or dollar cost shares even at that point, 60 to 70K. That's what I think. No guarantee we get a bounce, though. We could consolidate in that level, even bear flag lower on that Head and Shoulders. So you got to keep that in mind. We're in a cycle now going in through 2026, which is typically going to be a kind of a bear market for crypto up until, I think, 2027 running into 2028, which is the halving event. So that's where I see the trend potentially reversing is later in through 2027 and into 2028, pre and post halving event, basically. Not sure what month the halving takes place in 2028, but it's going to occur. And when that does, that's a catalyst for Bitcoin bouncing much higher. Anyway, guys, that's my take on Bitcoin and basically what I'm doing. I got to look at my watch list. Hit the back button. Sorry for the birds. I'm outside. Shut up. Fucker's loud, ain't he? They complaining about something. I've been loading up shares of the MicroStrategy preferred shares, STRC, primarily because par price for that preferred share is 100. So when it drops significantly below 100, I buy shares. And it pays like a 10 to 11% dividend yield. So If I'm going to hold anything MicroStrategy related, it'd be STRC. In addition, I have BTCI. I have a cover code I sold on it a couple of weeks ago. I'm positive on that. That's a hedge. That's why I was selling calls on it. I'm not averaging down yet on BTCI. When I do, I'll probably consider selling out of the money cash secured puts. Blocks, I picked up over 100 shares. I plan to average down at Bitcoin in the 60 to 70K range. When Bitcoin hits that, if it hits it, I'll be averaging down more aggressively on blocks at that point. In addition, I may be selling puts going forward on potentially Mara at first. Mara and CleanSpark are like leverage plays on Bitcoin's price action. They move way more than whatever the typical day move is on Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin holds up with this sell-off over the weekend into Monday, you're going to see a drastic drop in both CleanSpark and Mara. And I'm going to start looking at selling puts because volatility should spike and going into next week. And I believe we have a government shutdown that we went into. Don't quote me on that. So with that catalyst also, there's a lot of negative headwinds facing the market potentially. And if that happens, the VIX will spike and the implied volatility with the drop in Bitcoin will pump the implied volatility in both CleanSpark and Mara. And I'll start looking to sell puts. Now, you do Riot too if you want, or any other crypto miner potentially, but the ones I like the best for trading puts and they're significantly down from their highs are CleanSpark and Mara. So the first one I'll be looking at on Monday to sell puts on that I already have a watch list is Mara. The puts on this pay. And the way I do puts on any of these Bitcoin miners, I go to the end of the year and I go way out of the money and I average the premium I receive. So let's see if we get the 5 strike, how far we can go out on this one. January 2027. I go out into the year basically. I'm looking for like a 20% return on a $5 strike. And what that means is a 20% return to the end of the year on a $5 strike would be about $100. So I'm looking for at least $100. I've traded these positions constantly over the course of years and all the way back when Mara was around the $3 level and made bank on it. So there's going to be a time where you're going to be able to play that implied volatility and average up premium receive, and then on the bounce be able to close for a profit. And I've done that on a repeated basis. So that'll be one of the things I'll be looking at doing is selling puts on Mara and eventually CleanSpark and just average up premium received over time. And in 2023, I did this successfully. I had literally probably dozens and dozens of contracts at both Mara and CleanSpark, even on Riot at that point in time, pre-halving event. And then when Bitcoin ran prior to the halving, I came out on bank. I even had shares of a couple of the funds that were not listed on that were listed over-the-counter funds, like I think it was Grayscale. I bought shares of that before the halving event, before it came out as an ETF. I had shares of that one, and I doubled my money on that. And the crypto trade, you got to be prepared for the volatility. You got to be prepared for these events. That's why charting Bitcoin and looking at previous cycles too is very important. You get massive swings to the downside on Bitcoin. So you got to keep that in mind. All right, guys, that's my synopsis. That's where I'm looking for Bitcoin to get back down to that 60 to 70 range. And when it does, I'm going to be aggressively averaging down, dollar cost averaging shares of blocks, in addition to selling puts on Mara and CleanSpark at that point in time. I don't buy Bitcoin itself because I don't get paid to own Bitcoin outside of when it goes up, and it takes too much cash to do it. So it's easier for me just to pick up shares of a proxy or to sell out of the money puts on stuff like BTCI, or even pick up shares of BTCI because you're getting paid to own it. But you got to be cautious. You can't get in too prematurely. And to be honest, I'd always had that price target back down in here. So the reality is I got in a little bit early prior to this current pullback. I was picking up shares on the wedge down the bottom of that wedge pattern that you see. And now that we broke below it, now I'm going to back off and wait. I'm going to wait to that area that I mentioned right in here, around the 60K mark. All right, guys, be careful and cautious out there. This isn't financial advice. This is how I'm going to be tackling Bitcoin going in through 2028. So basically, it's going to be a 2-year trading pattern for me. Basically, it's not something I'm going to be going all in at one time. It's going to be dollar cost averaging, and you got to be prepared to be underwater for a while because that's probably what's going to happen, especially if that head and shoulders pattern plays out. Okay, take care. Bye.